Kia ora whānau, are you hokaraiti? This is part 2, part B of two homilies for Sunday the 30th of June 2024. I've entitled this one, What is God Doing? And as I said in part A, the whole gospel text for the day is Luke chapter 4 verses 21 through to 43. It's a long reading, and it's two stories, one story that bookends the other. In part 1 I've looked at the bookends. Today I'm looking this part I'm looking at the central part, the story that's in between. So this deals with Luke chapter 4 verses 24 through to 34. I'm going to read them. A large crowd followed Jesus and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who'd been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhages stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone out from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the truth. The whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Now, Jesus is on his way to the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler, an important person in town. He's on his way there in a hurry because Jairus' daughter is dying. And so Jesus has to nudge his way through the crowd who have presumably come there to see him, to spend time with him, but he has to work his way through so that he could quickly get to the house of Jairus, to be able to be there to offer healing to the daughter who is dying. Here's the interesting thing. As this is happening, there's a woman in the crowd, presumably a significantly older woman. She has been bleeding for 12 years. She has spent all her money on doctors, on quacks, on alternative therapists. You name it, she's given it a go because she's desperate. She has got nothing left. And as she sees Jesus going by, the thought occurs to her, if I could just touch the edge of his coat, I could be healed. And she thinks, what have I got to lose? And so she works her way through the crowd as Jesus is working his way, and there's a kind of point of intersection, and she reaches forward and just touches the edge of his garment. And in that moment, the bleeding stops. In that moment, she senses in her body that she has been restored, that after 12 long years, she has been made well. And she is both relieved and filled with a sense of, well, maybe a little bit of guilt because she had kind of taken this from Jesus. But what does Jesus do? He stops. Why? Well, I want to suggest something, that for a moment, and I don't know how long this lasts, but Jesus recognizes that power has gone from him. I think the text tells us that he's momentarily exhausted, or suddenly He knew that something of significance had happened. So he looks around and he asks, "Who touched me?" You see, here's the thing. What he recognizes is that God is doing something, has just done something, and Jesus wants to know what it was. He wants to know just what happened. So he's looking around. He's looking for the reason that this evacuation of power from him, of energy, of strength, just happened. Now, suddenly Jesus isn't in a hurry anymore. And so he's asking, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are saying, "What do you mean who touched you? Everybody's touching you." And he says, "No. Somebody touched me in a way expecting something. Expecting perhaps healing of some kind. Because I felt energy go from me." And this little lady, highly embarrassed, comes forward and she says, "It was me." And Jesus waits patiently while she tells him the story of the last 12 plus years of her life, and how difficult and how awful it's been, and how when she saw him passing by, she thought, the thought just occurred to me, if I could just touch the edge of his garment, I knew I'd be healed. And I was. And I was. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Jesus blesses her. Now here's the thing. Jesus at this point isn't triaging what's more important. Who's more important? He's dealing with who's in front of him right now. And at this moment, it happens to be this older woman who's been in misery for the last 12 years. He's aware that there's a girl out there who's dying and may already have died. As I say, I deal with that one quite separately. But he is fully focused on being present for this woman whom God has put right in front of him, right here and right now. I think it's useful for a lot of us who are in the caring professions to be focused on whom God has put in front of us. The next thing I want to notice is that there is a healing cost for Jesus. Because what we find is that her healing comes at a price to him. It's her illness for his wellness. It's almost as if there's this kind of divine exchange that happens in this moment, as he feels energy sucked from him, as she feels herself healed, and as he, in some way which we don't understand, takes him upon himself, her illness, her unwellness. And I can't help remembering that wonderful text that we so often focus on around Easter, from Isaiah 53, the text on the prophetic utterance of Isaiah concerning the suffering servant. Surely, in verse 4 of chapter 53, surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, and by his wounds we are healed. And here's a kind of archetypal example of this exactly happening. And it's offered in so many ways to each of us who would know freedom, who would know new beginnings, who would know a release into life. I think from memory, in Matthew's account, we discover that this woman is from Gennesaret. Gennesaret. And if you look at a map of the Sea of Galilee, at the top left-hand corner of the map, right in the corner there, you go from Nazareth and around to Capernaum and then on to Bethsaida, and that top left-hand corner is the region of Gennesaret. But what we discover is that when Jesus went there later, all that people wanted to do was touch the edge of his garment. This woman became an evangelist to the people of Gennesaret. They all heard her story. They heard of how she was healed. And so when Jesus went there, they, of course, thought, well, that worked for her. Why wouldn't it work for me? Actually, it did. It did. They were all healed. According to Matthew's Gospel, they were all healed. All they wanted to do was touch him, and they were healed. The reality is for us is that Jesus' purposes remained the same. In the business of wanting us to be free, to be able to walk in the fullness of life that we can only find in him. And we recognize that our freedom, our liberation, came at a cost to him. But he considered you and I worth it. Amen. God bless you.